During World War II, the United States tested a weapon idea so strange it still sounds fake. Tiny firebombs, attached to bats, dropped from planes. And in one of the story's best-known disasters, the bats escaped and set fire to the wrong place. That is not a joke. That is history. According to the famous version of the story, this wartime idea was pushed by Lytle S after seeing the huge bat colonies at Carlsbad Caverns, which is already an incredible place to begin. Most people walk into a cave full of bats and think, wow, that is a lot of bats. This man walked into a cave full of bats and thought, I can weaponize this. Now, before we laugh too early, the logic did make sense on paper. That is what makes the whole thing useful and dangerous. Certain bats, especially Mexican free-tailed bats, are small, numerous, and very good at squeezing into roofs, attics, and dark corners. So the clean plan was not to train bats to attack anyone. That would have been ridiculous in a completely different direction. The plan was to attach tiny incendiary devices to the bats, keep the bats cool and sleepy inside a special container, drop the container from an aircraft, let the bats wake up and scatter, and trust them to hide inside buildings before the charges ignited. Then, later, fire. Not one giant explosion. Lots of small fires in lots of hidden places at once. And because many Japanese cities at the time included large numbers of wooden structures, the people behind the project believed this could become a serious weapon. From a military distance, it sounded clever. From a normal human distance, it sounded like someone had lost control of the meeting. Still, the project moved forward. That is where the story gets even better. This was not a napkin sketch everyone laughed at and threw away. It was taken seriously enough to test. Containers were designed. Tiny incendiary charges were built. The bats were supposed to be chilled, loaded, dropped, released, and turned into a flying fire distribution system. That sentence should not exist, but it does. And just imagine the jobs this created. Somewhere, someone had to solve problems like, how do we store a large number of sleepy military bats? How do we attach the little fire devices? How do we stop the bats from waking up too early and setting our own side on fire? You can almost hear the exhausted answer, hopefully. And this is where the plan changed shape. On paper, the whole thing had order. It had diagrams, timing, engineering, confidence. In reality, it had bats. And bats, as it turns out, are not impressed by paperwork. During testing in New Mexico, one of the most famous mishaps happened. Some bats escaped early, not over an enemy city, not over a distant target, right there, around the testing area. And what did they do? Exactly what bats do. They flew off, looked for places to roost, and tucked themselves into nearby buildings. Only this time, they were carrying incendiary devices. So now picture the next scene. A military base expecting a careful, controlled demonstration. Then, tiny winged fire starters disappear into the wrong roofs. Then smoke. Then flames. Then a lot of deeply unhappy people realizing they had just been outmaneuvered by the basic daily behavior of a bat. That is the backfire. The idea worked just well enough to betray the people running it. And that is why the story is so perfect. The plan did not collapse because the bats refused to be bats. It collapsed because they were extremely good at being bats. Nobody needed a rebel bat. Nobody needed a genius bat. Nobody needed a traitor bat in a tiny leather jacket. An ordinary bat was enough. Fly, hide, hang. Accidentally set the wrong building on fire. That is almost always how these human stories work. People build a smooth plan in their heads. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Victory. Then reality walks in with weather, timing, confusion, animal behavior, and one moving part that absolutely does not care about your elegant chart. Only after you see that does the name matter. This is not just a weird war anecdote. It is a larger pattern. Humans design a system, assume control, and then discover that the real world is full of pieces that keep being themselves no matter how serious the meeting was. That is why the bat bomb story stays in your head. It lives in the perfect zone where a plan is smart enough to exist and absurd enough to collapse under its own weirdness. Eventually, the bat bomb project did not become a real wartime weapon. It was tested, developed for a while, and then dropped. Dropped in the sense of, maybe we should stop doing this. Part of that was timing. War projects compete with other war projects, and not every strange idea survives long enough to become policy, especially when your demonstration includes your own side catching fire. That tends to hurt confidence, a little, or a lot. And this is where the story opens up into a wider pattern. Humans love systems. Humans love tools. Humans love saying, we have figured it out. Then the real world says, great. Now try that with weather, timing, fear, confusion, and a living creature with wings. You see the same pattern everywhere. A company builds a beautiful process and discovers that actual people do not behave like neat arrows in a slide deck. A school makes a perfectly rational rule and finds out that students optimize for the rule instead of the goal. A machine is designed for ideal conditions, then meets rain, dust, panic, and one component with the emotional stability of a shopping cart. Same structure, different costume. That is the useful lesson. The more your grand plan depends on perfect control over messy living reality, the more likely reality is to turn sideways on you. That does not make the people behind the bat bomb stupid. That makes them human. They were clever enough to invent something astonishing, and confident enough to strap tiny bombs to wildlife and call it strategy. Honestly, that may be the most human sentence in the whole story. Nakuks. So the next time someone says history is boring, remember this. During World War II, serious adults working on a serious military project tested the idea of using bats as incendiary weapons. And in one of the story's best-known failures, the bats set the wrong place on fire. That is not boring. That is history wearing a fake mustache and whispering, "You could not invent me if you tried." And maybe that is the best part. The strangest stories are not strange because nobody thought them through. They are strange because somebody did. Very seriously. On paper. With budget. With containers. With confidence. And then a bat looked at the whole arrangement, ignored the elegant human intention, and turned it into smoke. That is the story of the bat bomb. A weapon so bizarre it sounds invented. A plan so clever it became silly. And a reminder that if your grand strategy depends on tiny flying mammals behaving perfectly, you may already be in trouble. If you liked this one, the next video is right here. Go watch that. And as always, let me know what you think down below. Thanks for watching, dummies. I'll see you in the next one.